Hello, everyone. My name is Jacqueline Brold, and I'm a Chief Advisor in the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. On behalf of the Danish Refugee Commission, Save the Children Denmark, and the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to everyone who's joined us today for this important session. The title of this session is Standing by Our Promise to Leave No One Behind in the Context of GBV Prevention and Response in Afghanistan. The session is held on a very disturbing and concerning backdrop. Women's rights are deteriorating rapidly in Afghanistan. Sexual and gender-based violence is a pervasive problem, as we'll hear much more about today. And I'm looking very much forward to listening to our insightful speakers today and to learn how we as a humanitarian community can become much stronger in basically preventing, mitigating, and responding to GBV and other gender-specific risks. We have some key speakers in the room, as you have probably already seen. They will enlighten us on the situation on the ground in Afghanistan today, and they'll provide us also with some recommendations on how to best move forward under the current and very challenging situation. You will get a chance to engage with all of these speakers at the end of this session. So please do jot down your questions as they pop up and post them in the chat, and we will hopefully get to them towards the end. But before we move to the country level in Afghanistan, it's a great pleasure for me to invite Lone Torup, who works together with me here at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. She is the lead of this global initiative called Call to Action on Protection from Gender-Based Violence in Emergencies, to provide us with the opening remarks. Welcome, Lone. You are muted, Lone.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline, and dear partners and participants. First of all, thanks a lot to Danish Refugee Council and Save the Children for organizing this very important event. The rights of women and girls and their empowerment and protection have been cornerstone in Denmark's global development and humanitarian work for decades. This is also why Denmark chose to take leadership of the global initiative Call to Action last year, a multi-stakeholder partnership of now more than 100 members working collectively to transform the way gender-based violence is addressed in humanitarian action. As members of Call to Action, we are bound together by a 5-year roadmap from 2021 to 2025. The roadmap guides the work, and it makes us accountable to each other. Call to Action is extremely relevant in Afghanistan right now. Denmark has made substantial efforts to protect and promote the rights of women and girls over the years. And we are deeply concerned by the current situation in the country, particularly when it comes to the situation for women and girls. As part of Call to Action leadership, the Danish Minister for Development last year reached out to the UN system. He stressed the need and obligation for all humanitarian actors to continue working to guarantee the female humanitarian workers, and particularly Afghan women, have safe and equal access to carry out their humanitarian work. Also, the minister stressed that women's full participation would be vital for identifying their priorities and needs. We must establish partnerships with women-led organizations that involve financial transfers, capacity building, and their inclusion in decision-making processes. Local women-led organizations are significantly underfunded and yet uniquely positioned to address the impact of the crisis because they know the context. The Call to Action Coalition has a strong voice. When we work with a common messages across the humanitarian community, we can make a change and achieve our goals. In closing, I want to express appreciation for the work done by you and your staff on the ground. Kwatsia, Jared, and Athena, we look forward to listen and learn from your presentations. This exchange of information and dialogue is extremely important to improve our collective call to action work in Afghanistan. Thank you.
Jacqueline, you're muted.
Thank you for that. Sorry about that. So thank you, Lorna, for those remarks. And I'm now happy to invite Qudsia Raheen, who's a women's rights activist. Qudsia Raheen graduated from the Law and Political Science faculty and was a student of Master of Public Policy and Administration at Kabul University. Qudsia Raheen has worked as an advocacy manager for more than 3 years in Afghan Women Network, which is a network for women with more than 143 members and 3,700 individual members of women in Afghanistan. I would now like to invite you, Qudsia, to speak to us about the current situation regarding women's rights and gender-based violence. Welcome. Qudsia, can you hear us? Qudsia? There we go.
Hello?
Yes, please. Welcome.
Okay. Okay. Welcome. Thank you. Hello, everyone. This is Qudsia Raheen. And as she mentioned, I'm graduated from Faculty of Law and Political Science and work as an advocacy manager in Afghanistan. And I'm really happy that I am today as a part of this forum. And I'm talking about the situation of Afghan people, especially Afghan women and girls, and that the current situation, which they really need to their voices should be heard. Today, I'm going to talk or present my presentation regarding the women's situation in Afghanistan. Before I start the current situation of women in Afghanistan, I'm going to talk about the situation of GBV and gender-based violence and humanitarian activities in Afghanistan in the past 2 decades, the achievements and also the challenges we had. After that, I will highlight the current situation of Afghan people, especially women and girls, in the last 7 months. The situation, the concerns that Afghan women are suffering at the current situation, and also the recommendation which I collected from Afghan women and also Afghan girls. If we want to talk about the past situation of Afghan women in Afghanistan, especially in the last 2 decades, we can find that the root of violence in Afghanistan was in families. As we thought we have the cultural problem in Afghanistan, and also in religious problem in Afghanistan, in beliefs. Some people believe that the rights of women is not accepted for men in Afghanistan. As we mentioned before, it is rooted in the families. And after that, slowly it comes to community and the whole country. So the gender-based violence is rooted in our families and also in our culture. Unfortunately, in our religion, that the people has different beliefs regarding the woman. And about the women also in Afghanistan, sometimes the women accepted the violence and they are not fighting against that. And that's the main problem in Afghanistan. They are accepting that this is the violence is part of their life. If they are a victim of the violence, also they cannot share their concerns, and also they don't make it as a formal. They don't make to access to justice, and this is the big problem of Afghan women, and it's paved the way for other violation in Afghanistan as well. Also, as we had different structures in our country in the past 2 decades, the different achievements we have, but as well there was challenges as well in Afghanistan, which I'm going to highlight this. The challenges the achievement. First of all, I'm going to talk about the achievements of regarding gender-based violence, and also regarding women improvement in Afghanistan. We had different improvements. For example, in governmental sectors, we had different structures. Different structure established in Afghanistan. We have established of administrative structures. For example, Independent Human Rights Commission. We have Ministry of Women Affairs, where especially work for women rights and also refer the cases of women and work for women justice. We had different family FRU and family responses units, gender departments in our governmental sectors, and communities that lead women activities. We had 34 courts which are work against violence in Afghanistan and follow the cases of women, especially gender-based violence cases, freely. We had this achievement and regarding the administration. About the laws, Afghanistan became part of different communities at the international level and also national level. At international level, Afghanistan was ratified the CEDAW Convention, and also was part of Human Rights in Declaration, and followed the Human Rights Declaration in Afghanistan. We had the UN Security Council with Resolution 1325, and we had NAP 1325 in Afghanistan, which was National Action Plan, followed by different ministries, which is a big achievement in the past 2 decades for Afghan women and for justice of women. Other part of the achievement was we have at the national level we have Constitution of Afghanistan, which support the right of women equally to the men, and also elimination of violence against women law, which is EVALA, anti-harassment law. We ratified the anti-harassment law. All of these laws support the right of women and reduce the gender-based violence in Afghanistan. Also, different part of and we had gender activities in different part of our administratives. For example, we had the policies and the guidelines, and also gender units in each ministries of in Afghanistan. The other part was the fundamental right of Afghan women, for example, right of participation in media, right of education, right of healthcare, right of participation in political and social decision making. All of these fundamental rights was supported by Constitution and was fully involved women on this. Also, we have a positive discrimination in Afghanistan, which was a big achievement for Afghan women, and also to support women in Afghanistan, especially women and girls who are deprived from the social achievements. We had a positive discrimination that 30% of positive discrimination with the women and men with the women and girls can participate in in administration in 30%. So it was a big achievement in the last 20 years. The other part was that access of women in the peace, and also at the high level of which was a women political participation. For example, we had women ministers of women as a deputy, women as a governor, and also deputy of governor. Women was as a part of peace dialogues. They shared their voices, they shared their ideas and different ideas with the people. But and beside that, we have some challenges as well. The challenges that Afghan woman was, the challenges of woman improvement in the past 2 decades was that Afghan woman was not the priorities for our government, because Afghanistan was a warful country and we were faced with war. The aggressive and defensive situation was open in Afghanistan, so Afghan women cannot participate in any activities, and it was the second part for our country. The first priority was war. And the other situation was that we had laws, we had ratified different laws and regulation, but there was just as a not in practical. We had in our constitution, we had different laws that signed, but it was not just most practical for Afghan women. So one of the problem was this. The other problem is that Afghan women was not as a priorities. The policies that implemented in Afghanistan, they always supported the different groups, but not just the women. It was supported women, but not totally the women. The rule of the influential parties was in Afghanistan too much. So in different opportunities, they take the seats, but the Afghan woman was backed by themselves. And nowadays, after the coming of Taliban, if we talk about the current situation of women, unfortunately, we can see that different achievements of women in the past 2 decades are deprived and also damaged by the Taliban government. Today when we are talking about the women's situation, the structures that I mentioned before, the structure are already damaged. The women's situation is very bad in Afghanistan, as they don't have access to education, they don't have access to their basic rights, they don't have access to share their voices freely in the media. As we can see, nowadays there are no woman in the media. There is no woman in Afghanistan going to the education, to follow education. But the positive point about the education is that, and after the pressure, the Taliban said that the woman can go to schools after 7 months of their government. So it's a positive way that the woman can join their schools. But still we have some problems. For example, the woman, they are talking that the woman cannot be as with men at the same class. They are classified the girls and boys classes regarding education, and also they said that in some cases that if the women students are less, so we can join two fields, which is not logical. Two different fields, they join two different fields and they put classes together, which is not too much logical. And also the other problem that Afghan women are suffering is injustice. Today, we don't have the justice system, the formal justice system in Afghanistan, which damaged the Afghan woman situation and Afghan girl situation. As nowadays, we don't have any courts that supporting any judge that are supporting the women cases. We don't have any defense lawyer from women's side. We don't have any attorney generals that support women's rights. And also the access to justice for women is very tough. And this is one of the reasons that the rate of violence is getting rise day by day in Afghanistan, and the family violence is getting the rate of rise. The other problem that Afghan woman is suffering is that we said that in the last days, the human rights defender and also the women that conducted different protests, they are disappeared. And this is the kind of discrimination against women, that they cannot share their voices, they cannot share their ideas. We also see that in the TVs, that nowadays there is no woman in the TVs, no peace there, no dialogues there, including women. As some of the women are participating in the dialogues, but they are not inside Afghanistan. They are talking from outside of Afghanistan. The women who are inside Afghanistan, they don't have the freedom of idea and freedom of expression in Afghanistan. The other problem that nowadays Afghan women are suffering is poverty. Unfortunately, that the children and also mothers are suffering from poverty. They lost their jobs, they lost their careers, and this is the 7 month that they are not working. In the Ministry of Women Affairs is locked by Taliban, and also the other structures that women was part of the community, they are all locked by the government of Taliban. Women and do not have access to their jobs and careers, and this is the main problem, that the women don't have access to their rights and also don't have access to the money, and it brings different challenges in Afghanistan, especially regarding the gender. And the other problem is that which Afghan women are suffering in Afghanistan is, as I mentioned before, the access to justice is very less, and the shelters. We don't have nowadays the shelters. Some shelters are open, but they are very working in the limitation. There is no freedom like past. The women are very under the pressure who are living in Afghanistan. So these kind of problems pave the way for women to do not come to community, and they are isolated by the Taliban. The other problem that the Taliban share, that the women of Afghanistan do not have the allowance to work in the community and also to travel without any mahram, which is a big problem. And the other problem is covering. They are putting restriction on women that they should cover the black colors clothes, and also the clothes that they has the light colors. For example, the women and girls in Afghanistan are not allowed to wear green color or also red color, and it's a big problem for women. They don't have the choice to choose their clothes, which is the basic right of every people. And this is the kind of depression, and also it's a kind of pressure on Afghan women. They don't have access to anything any achievement that in the past they had. So regarding these challenges, I'm sharing some recommendation also with you. Also, with the recommendation of Afghan women is that, and a recommendation of us is that the international community and human rights organization must support women at current situation and should prioritize when they are supporting the Afghan women. For example, when they are taking the projects to Afghan women, the main point of this project should be women. The main point of each agenda and the international community should be Afghan women. For example, while they are giving the project to Afghan government or giving the project to the Afghanistan, the priority must be women. The implementer and also the beneficiaries should be Afghan women. So by this kind, we can involve women in the community again. The other recommendation is the civil society organization, especially women rights organization, must be supported. As we compare today's organization that's supporting women rights, especially women rights organization, with the past. In the past, there was the fund was too much. But nowadays, as I was a part of AWN, which Afghan Women Network, which was a big network in Afghanistan, supported 143 other organizations, which was women. We had lots of fund, we had lots of staffs that work, but nowadays the fund is very less. So we cannot conduct the activities like past. We cannot support the women like past. I'm requesting that the international community should support the women organization at current time, which is the need of Afghanistan. The other is that the international community must hold Afghanistan accountable for the international commitments. As Afghanistan is part of CEDAW, Afghanistan is implementing. Afghanistan is following the Human Rights Declaration. So Afghanistan must be accountable for that. Why that situation of women is getting worse day by day? Why the GBV is getting gender-based violence in Afghanistan is getting rise? As Afghanistan is part of the international community nowadays. The other recommendation is that there should be a pressure pressure of international community on Afghan government, that Afghan government must follow a law and regulation, which is okay. I will finish in 4 minutes. That the pressure of international community should be on Afghan government, that Afghan government must follow the rule and regulation. In Afghanistan now there is no law, no people. There is all laws which was implemented in the past are all damaged by Taliban, and they are implementing their own laws, which is not familiar with for women, for men, and also even for men. They must follow the law and regulations. The other is that the coordination committee must be established between the human rights organization and also the Taliban to inform the Taliban about the human rights. And also my other recommendation is that the Afghan government must abide by humanitarian activities. The Afghan government must obey the humanitarian activities, and also the gender-based violence must be the priority for Afghanistan. They should not ignore the situation of women nowadays. Women should be invited by the international communities in international events, as nowadays the participation of women in the international community is not much colorful. The other recommendation is that the humanitarian organization, especially the organizations that are working in protection, must support the Afghan women. As I mentioned before, lots of the women who conducted protests in the past days, but they are now disappeared. There is no voice for them. That their case is not followed by any people. So the humanitarian and the protection, especially the organization which are working for the protection, they must have their voice and at this regard, especially about the voice of women. And my last recommendation is that a number of countries about education. A number of countries nowadays announce the scholarships, but they are locked Afghanistan from the scholarship, and it's a kind of discrimination against Afghans, especially Afghan girls. And this is because of the Taliban restriction, as they said that Afghan girls cannot travel without mahram. so they take the opportunity of women participation in international community and international achievements and international opportunities. Because of that, they removed Afghanistan from these opportunities, and we are requesting that these opportunities must be for Afghan women and girls. Thank you, and sorry for taking much time.
Thank you so much, Kutsia, for all these incredibly important points. There is so much to speak about in what you have just raised. I think we shall continue in our program. Thanks again, and invite now Jared Rowell, the DRC country director in Afghanistan. Jared has been working in Afghanistan since 2018 and since 2020 as the country director. You are most welcome, Jared, to the session. And I'm not sure where to start really after this quite extensive overview provided by Kutsia, but what would you perceive as the most important gender-based violence risks that Afghanistan is faced with today?
Sure. Thank you very much. And thanks to everyone for joining this really important session on a very important topic here in the country. I think most importantly, it's really essential that we connect this to a global perspective around GBV. GBV is a violation of international human rights and humanitarian law. As a protection organization and a call to action on protection from GBV member, DRC is deeply concerned about how GBV continues to proliferate and remains a primary risk factor threatening the well-being and the lives of women and girls affected by forced displacement in Afghanistan. Female refugees, asylum seekers, and IDPs are at heightened risk of experiencing GBV, while also being less likely to be able to access life-saving GBV services and support to recover. The GBV sector in Afghanistan is also severely underfunded compared to other sectors, so the majority of survivors are not receiving adequate protection and are not accessing the life-saving services and support which they so desperately need right now. And as a result of increased levels of conflict and displacement, and because of home confinements during the early phases of COVID, GBV levels were already on the rise in Afghanistan. However, since the events of August, violence against women and girls has further increased due to restrictions in women and girls' enjoyment of their rights and freedoms. UNAMA reports that the rate of violence against women and girls in Afghanistan is the highest in the world, and that the recent restrictions against women in the country, especially on their right to work and education, has increased the level of violence against them. In Afghanistan, 9 out of 10 women experience at least one form of intimate partner violence in their lifetime. And while education is known as a critical protective factor for children and youth, access to education for girls remains highly restrictive. And where education is available, many children are being forced to drop out due to rising levels of poverty. The deterioration in the country's economic situation has had a major impact on households and communities. Having exhausted nearly all coping strategies in the past few months, such as selling assets and borrowing money, Afghans are now increasingly resorting to desperate measures and negative coping strategies. These include child labor, child recruitment, the sale exchange of children, and forced early marriage of adolescent girls for family to collect increasingly small dowries. The significant increase of child marriage is related to the deteriorating economic hardship, pushing families into poverty. Families are desperate to generate money and are now forced into situations where they have to treat their children as transactional commodities in order to prevent starvation, avoid prosecutions derived from debt, and acquire urgent life-saving medical care. The economic crisis in Afghanistan has further led to the deterioration of social cohesion, bringing about increasing discrimination and the exclusion of women from public spaces in their own communities. The prevalence and increase of GBV in Afghanistan points to the importance of ensuring that GBV is recognized as a gross human rights violation and a life-saving issue. Additionally, GBV risks and the specific groups at risk, including women and girls, should be identified, which requires data and evidence. And finally, GBV should be acted upon with GBV prevention and response programming for at-risk groups and GBV survivors as an integral part of key component humanitarian response from the outset. Thanks.
Indeed, Jared. And I'm just thinking, considering your own mandate as your organization and working hard, I'm sure, every day to work on these issues, what do you, from your perspective, from inside, being a humanitarian actor, what do you see as your main challenges in addressing some of these issues?
Protection is a really complex and difficult to navigate topic here in Afghanistan. There are certain areas of work where your mandate as an agency allows you to move forward in ways that may not always be entirely principled because you're providing urgent, life-saving humanitarian response and support. But protection requires female participation from your staff and from the communities. So the space available and our ability to access, mitigate, and respond to GBV has been further restricted with the requirement for female aid workers in the humanitarian sector to be accompanied by a mahram, a male chaperone in the field. While the requirement and existence of mahrams is not a new dynamic in Afghanistan, for DRC and other humanitarian agencies, the presence of mahrams in the field is a significant concern as it undermines and limits many protection activities, such as community-based engagement with women and girls, protection monitoring, the identification of those who need GBV services, and collection of sensitive data in a secure and confidential manner. Simply speaking, women may not feel comfortable coming forward and speaking to our female staff if they see a male chaperone wandering around in their environment. Further, human rights defenders, GBV specialists, women activists, protection experts have come under attack in recent months, facing intimidation, harassment, arbitrary arrests, and many of them have been forced to leave the country. This has been particularly impactful against women and women-led organizations who have been excluded from participating in government meetings and other forms of civil society.
And I'm just thinking there must be some hope somewhere, some small hooks of ideas of how we can overcome these challenges. What do you think is really needed to reach those most behind?
So DRC still remains one of the largest protection actors in the country. DRC alone is responsible for nearly half of the country's protection monitoring in terms of geography. So we cover half of the 34 provinces with protection monitoring. That also includes providing legal services to women who need that type of support, providing additional referral pathways to additional services that they can access as a form of GBV-related responses. Additionally, DRC is a really large multi-purpose cash actor, meaning we distribute cash that can be used by households for any different number of reasons. And that includes female-led households accessing certain related GBV services. But I think more broadly, it's really paramount that we continue to bring attention to the humanitarian situation in the country, that we ensure principled engagement on the rights of women and girls, and collectively devise principled solution to the events as they're presently unfolding in the country. I think we should conclude with a call for all stakeholders in the humanitarian system to prevent, mitigate, and respond to GBV. DRC globally is a call to action on GBV member, and in line with the call to action core principles and the objectives, we apply a holistic and comprehensive approach to combating and ending GBV. That includes providing specialized GBV and prevention and response programming, efforts to ensure GBV services are accessible and available from the onset of an emergency. We provide actions to prevent GBV and to mitigate those risks as an integral part of humanitarian response across different sectors from the earliest stages and throughout the program cycle. And we stay true to our shared responsibility to mainstreaming gender and having gender considerations across all of our different activities. To prevent and mitigate GBV, we must address the root causes of gender norms and gender inequality in Afghanistan. Moving forward, humanitarian actors need to enhance efforts that address discriminatory social norms, beliefs, policies, and laws that perpetuate discrimination against women and girls, and further advance behavioral change strategies aimed at changing the knowledge, attitudes, and social norms in communities. We strive for a life free of violence as a fundamental human right. It's a right too often denied women and girls because of their gender and their displacement status. And it's a really critical topic in Afghanistan at the moment. And it's something that we shouldn't lose sight of as we're providing numerous different interventions across a wide range of humanitarian needs. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Jared, and thank you also, particularly as the lead of the call to action, to show your and express your commitment as you just did to this important cause. I'm just going to move along in the program, and I'm now very happy to welcome Athena Rayburn. Athena Rayburn is Save the Children Afghanistan's Director of Advocacy and Communication, and you've been in Afghanistan since January last year, and you've in particular been focusing on securing exemptions under various sanctions and legislation, and advocating for children, and in particular girls, and access to education. Now, what do you see as some of the most significant effects of the transition of power on Afghanistan's children, and in particular, of course, girls?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think we've had a really broad spectrum of the changes that we've seen. Initially, of course, we did have challenges with the Taliban authorities and systematic widespread access for our female staff. For Save the Children, we said very early on, if we cannot have our female staff working, we won't be able to continue working in Afghanistan. And it was encouraging, at least initially, to see that we were able to negotiate access for our female staff, even though with some of the restrictions around mahrams and those other issues that the other speakers have mentioned are still becoming a challenge. For us, the biggest sticking point has been girls' education. In September, the authorities announced that schools would be open for boys, but not for girls. And in the subsequent 7 months, girls have lost out on millions of days of school since, and in that time have been at increased risk of violence and abuse. It's important to remember, though, that even before the transition of power, the education system in Afghanistan was ranked amongst the top 8 at most extreme risk. And despite improvements in girls' access to secondary school specifically, we still had over 2 million girls out of school before August. Following the transition of power, obviously that situation has gotten much worse. Estimates are around 1 million girls that are now out of school, and we've got shortages of female teachers that also serve as a barrier. One of the most disturbing things that we found is Save the Children did a needs assessment in December 2021 and found that about 50% of girls aged 10 to 18 were now out of school, compared to only about 21% of boys. I was in Kandahar last week and speaking to girls where, school has been shut there for some months, even though it's one of the hotter weather districts where they should have been open. But there are a lot of reasons why girls aren't going to school there. Their families can't afford to pay the fees. The schools are too far away and there's no safe transport for girls to take. There are no female teachers and there are concerns about what's being taught or who is teaching them. And, one of the most worrying developments that we've seen as a result of the economic crisis is that a lot of families are holding their daughters home, especially those girls that are around secondary age, because they're a bit older and able to help out at home or look after their siblings or go out to work themselves. In the assessment that we did, around 40% of households said that they were sending their girls to work because they needed the economic income. And in addition to this, again, as Jared said, we are seeing an increase in girls and children, especially being sold for work and sold to cover debt, girls forced into early marriage as well. So we're really seeing quite a marked increase in these things, and we are really able to directly link that to a lack of access to education.
Yeah, that's very disturbing. I'm wondering what you see as the long-term effects of these protection risks. I mean, this will clearly, I'm sure, have an impact in various ways. Lack of access to education, lack of access to maybe the workforce, etc. What do you see as these effects?
Yeah, it's a really important question. And the fact is, girls not having access to education doesn't just impact the girls themselves, but communities and countries as a whole. We already know globally that girls' vulnerability is increased to protection risks like sexual violence, child marriage, and child labor when they can't go to school. In contexts like Afghanistan, it's important to remember that school is often just a safe space where parents know their children will be for a number of hours a day, where they're looked after and they're safe. We also see that girls who are out of school have decreased access to protection services such as mental health and psychosocial support, because nearly all of our programs, so Save the Children, for example, we work through referral pathways, and we really rely on the teachers in our CBEs and our community-based education programs and adults that have regular daily interactions with girls and children who are trained to spot signs of children experiencing abuse or trauma or mental health distress. So we're seeing this twofold situation where when girls are out of school, they simultaneously become more exposed to protection risks whilst losing access to protection services that would be able to support them. And increasingly worrying me is the assessment I mentioned earlier. One of the most concerning pieces of information that came back was that 80% of communities that they had no access to protection services at all, which is extremely worrying when we consider we've got the situation where protection services have collapsed and girls who are extremely vulnerable already are no longer in school. Finally, as well, I'll say, we talk a lot about Afghanistan being an aid-dependent country, and in particular, the education budget was previously funded about 80% through foreign aid. And we talk a lot about moving Afghanistan beyond its dependence on aid. If girls aren't allowed to go to school, if we don't actually allocate the resources that would overcome those barriers, we're never going to be able to talk about an Afghanistan that's no longer dependent on aid. And we're seeing now with some of the policies that are being instituted by the Taliban, such as mahram, such as gender segregated schooling, if we don't make sure that there are buildings for girls to go to school in, female teachers to teach them, pens and papers for girls to write with, even when schools reopen, we're going to see that girls won't be there. And one thing that we really need to be looking at now is that the Taliban authorities have announced that schools are actually supposed to reopen tomorrow for girls and boys. But we need to make sure that action is taken by, EU member states, by the international community, to make sure the funds and resources are there so that, once the Taliban have opened schools, it's not our policies and the economic crisis and the lack of funds that mean that girls still can't go.
And I mean, there is, of course, a clear link between girls not being able to go to school and early, child marriages and increasing prevalence of gender-based violence, I'm sure. What do you think, in addition to what you've said around funding, for example, what would be your recommendations both to civil society actors, but also UN and member states for increasing action?
I think what's clear, especially from the other speakers that we've heard, there is no one-shot silver bullet resolution to the protection and gender-based violence crisis that we're seeing. What is clear is that girls' education is one solution to keep Afghan girls safe and protected, both in the short and longer term. But to make that solution effective, we need everyone to approach the crisis in Afghanistan holistically. So on the programming side, yes, we need funding for education. Education is a life-saving measure. We have the Education Cluster's transitional framework, which is asking for 1.5 billion to reopen schools and get kids in school. And frankly, that 1.5 billion is the bare minimum needed to keep kids in school. We also need, the international community to step up and cover support costs for agencies like Save the Children that will allow female staff to actually continue to participate. We use mahrams, we have gender segregated buildings, cars. If we don't actually put the resources behind these commitments to support female participation, we will lose that. And we see time and time again in contexts far beyond Afghanistan, that we don't have proper participation for female frontline workers, vulnerable populations become so exposed to risk. We also need to make sure that we mainstream protection services into education. We've heard about the challenges with protection actors at the moment. It's increasingly difficult, even for Save the Children. Our child protection staff face huge amounts of risk. And one of the easiest ways to address this is through making sure that we are mainstreaming protection work in education. And finally, the other critical piece, and many of us will hear us talking about this all the time, is we have to address the economic crisis. The freezing of assets, withdrawal of assistance, all of these things are driving poverty. We can't protect girls without resolving the crisis. We could have the most well-funded, principled, designed humanitarian response in the world, but if regular families cannot access cash, Afghan girls will continue to pay the price. So we really need to find the political will to address the liquidity situation in Afghanistan as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Athena, for all your really valuable insights. We actually do now have 10, 12 minutes for some questions from the audience. I haven't received any questions yet, but while I wait for hopefully some questions will come. I'm a bit curious on this whole discussion around localization, and Qudsia, maybe you could share some more insights on what do you think needs to happen to bring even more of local actors to the forefront of addressing all of these challenges?
Sorry. Yes, as I mentioned before, that at current situation in Afghanistan, the women need the international support, and the aid support must, the precondition should be women. The women agenda should be at the first, women and girls. As Antina said, that today we are very concerned about the education of girls, as it's in the past period of Taliban when they take the over in 1975 in Afghanistan. There was that still we are suffering from this problem. The access of education of girls and women, especially, and also not just girls and women and men. The access to education was very less. They did not have access to education just at 5 years. So the problem that today we are suffering, and in the last 20 years we suffered about the gender-based violence in our families, as the man was uneducated, the woman was uneducated. So we work to give them awareness, but the awareness, the difference between awareness and practical education is very different. And it was really the problem that we suffered from the first round of Taliban. And it was the far of women and men from the education. So we are focusing about the education, and I'm requesting that the first of all the schools of girls and boys should be open. And it's the first priority for each other. The other priority for Afghan people is that the access of women to the community, to the social participation should be must. For example, as I said before, nowadays we are suffering, the Afghan girls and women are suffering different problems in Afghanistan. One of the problems that I'm talking about is they don't have allowance to go to the community, to be as a part of the community. I hear from some our relatives and some people that some women that they are what they want to be as a part of community. They want to join their jobs and their careers. When they want to go to their careers and jobs, the course did not allow them because of the Taliban restriction. And if in the car there is men, the woman cannot join the car. Or if they want to join the car, there is 4 seats. A woman should take the rent of the 4 people, then she can sit in 1 seat. And it's a big restriction for women. The other restriction that I mentioned before is the wearing. It's the basic right for Afghan women, and we need fight. It need more fight against that in GBV in Afghanistan. That a girl today don't have the allowance, don't have the choice to wear what, and it's a basic right, but they don't have this choice. And the other part is too much big. For example, political participation in decision making. It's as a big problem. We are nowadays we go back to the 20 years. We are now fighting for the basic rights, not just not just on their political participation on decision making level. I think it needs more support, and also more policies should be done, and more advocacy should be done for Afghan women. Not just the basic. If we consider the 2 points of the women's situation in Afghanistan, not just the basic situation, at high level situation, we must advocate for both of them, and not just with Afghan government, with international community as well.
Thank you so much, Qudsia. And Jared, I was just wondering, in terms of preventing some of these, preventing GBV, is there anything more you see we can do in terms of addressing the root causes?
Yes, and I think Athena raised a really important point around that, which is that in addition to the humanitarian response, you do need to carve out a space that provides an element that addresses durable solutions, but also addressing root causes. And I think that we do need to make sure that we don't lose sight of that. It's really critical for the protection sector and GBV specifically. And yes, there are things that DRC does as part of our protection-based work, particularly around community sensitization around these topics, providing a degree of education and awareness raising so that people are aware of some of these concepts, that there are certain international norms that Afghanistan should rise to, providing different resources through our other activities. DRC is a very large mine action actor where we do mine risk education. And during those sessions, we're able to integrate certain protection-related discussions. I think the challenge now with the new de facto authorities in place is that you have to just be very cautious about certain words that you use and certain concepts that you discuss in a certain way. We are trying to integrate certain GBV-related discussions into places like schools and health centers where they're a little more safer to discuss. So there are things that we can do to address durable solutions, but it's more challenging now, and we just have to tread a lot more carefully.
And Athena, is this something that you recognize from your work too? I'm thinking particularly around schools being sort of a protective space for children. How do you, in practice, and Save the Children, work on prevention of GBV?
Yeah, it's we have a similar approach and make sure that we do a lot of community sensitization and engaging families. But one of the main ways that we've found successful, especially in Afghanistan, is engaging with community leaders, really working with local groups, civil society, to make sure that we can actually integrate and make sure the community is behind the protection work we're doing. All of our community-based education and child protection work involves teaching kids themselves about their rights, about language they can use to advocate for themselves, safe places. We make sure they have access to adults that are part of our staff so that they can feed back to us and speak to us, and it's a safe space. And I think that work is really important because we've had a lot about the root causes today, and you really need to start with the communities to make sure, because they are the first port of call. One of the most effective interventions of our child protection work is our community-based child protection networks, which are made up of members of the community that are trained to identify when abuse and exploitation is happening and trained in being able to respond safely so the child is not put at risk. And one of the biggest challenges we're seeing in the situation now is that even responding to children that are being exploited and are vulnerable puts them further at risk. So it's so important to engage in that community sensitization to make sure that our work really does no harm.
Absolutely. And time is running a little short now, but I was just wondering, maybe a quick round before we wrap up with one key recommendation that you would really like to put forward in terms of how can we really move forward, just to leave us with a little bit of hope maybe at the end of this session. Qudsia, would you like to start?
I think my key recommendation is that nowadays Taliban take over the Afghanistan and they are ruling in Afghanistan. I think that the international community and other organizations must talk or must create a committee that work with Taliban and side and give them awareness regarding humanitarian activities.
That was short and sweet, Qudsia. Thank you so much. Jared, do you have any last remark?
Sure. So I think, protection from sexual exploitation and abuse was explicitly mentioned for the first time in this year's Afghanistan Humanitarian Response Plan. GBV has been mentioned in the past, and I think we just need to make sure that we continue to explicitly reference those initiatives as part of a wide-scale and holistic humanitarian response. And that we really dig into those issues very concretely and explicitly moving forward. Protection is very important, but we also need to stratify GBV as well and make sure it's part of a very integrated core humanitarian response in the country.
Yeah, thank you, Jared. And Athena, last point?
Yeah, I completely agree with the recommendations of the other speakers. I think one thing I would say is that so much of the economic crisis in Afghanistan is being driven by policies and decisions that are not being made in Kabul. They are caused by the freezing of assets and inability for governments to engage with the central bank and look at liquidity solutions that would actually allow families to get cash. And I really think we need to look at ourselves as an international community and what our values are, because at the moment, the decision that's being made is that we are continuing to allow this crisis to deepen because we don't want to risk any perception of aid diversion or engaging with the Taliban. And as Qudsiya said, they are here and we must figure out how to engage with them or things will only get worse. It's really important. And that engagement should be grounded in human rights, in particular, protection of women and girls.
Thank you for that last point. And with that, we will unfortunately not cover much more today. I would really, really like to thank you all speakers for being so engaging in the dialogue. And I think really in particular, we do owe you, Qudsiya, a special thanks for your courage to speak up so clearly on these very important issues. Thank you so much. We have to, and I think it's been stressed many times, as a collective community, continue to push for increased support to local women's organizations, women-led organizations, and put SGBV survivors in the forefront of our efforts. And certainly, I know as a lead of the call to action, we would like to encourage more states and donors as well as local organizations to become members of the call to action. Together, we have a stronger voice. And finally, let me all again thank you for important reflections. Your recommendations have been extremely useful, and we certainly look forward to continue very close collaboration. Thank you all.